Kunle was the man everyone envied. At just 35, he had built a thriving business in Lagos, owning several successful stores across the city. His neighbors admired him for his humility and kindness, despite his wealth. They often said Kunle was a rare man. He was also a family man, devoted to his wife, Chiwa, and their 4 children. Bolu, the firstborn, was a boy of 10. Dara, the second child and only girl, was 8 years old. Timmy, the third, was a mischievous 6-year-old boy, and Simi, the youngest at 4, was a boy full of laughter. To Kunle, his family was his greatest blessing. Chiwa, his wife, was the jewel of his heart. She was strikingly beautiful, and Kunle often told his friends that when Chiwa walked into a room, everyone noticed her. He adored her, never letting her lift a finger. He hired maids to handle chores and ensured her wardrobe was always filled with the latest fashion. However, there was something about Chiwa Kunle couldn't quite place. She often seemed distracted, and her smile rarely reached her eyes. Whenever Kunle asked her about it, she would brush it off, saying she was tired. Kunle, being the understanding husband, believed her. One evening, everything changed. Bolu, their first child, collapsed at home. He had been complaining of weakness for days, but no one thought it was serious. Chiwa screamed as Kunle carried their son to the car and rushed him to the nearest hospital. At the hospital, the doctor informed them that Bolu needed a blood transfusion immediately because he had lost a lot of blood. The doctor asked if either of them knew their blood type. Kunle immediately volunteered to donate blood, asking the doctor to save his son. The doctor nodded and took Kunle's blood for testing. Kunle sat in the waiting room, holding Chiwa's trembling hand. He assured her Bolu would be fine, though he felt a knot of worry in his stomach. Minutes turned into hours before the doctor returned, his face serious. Kunle stood up and asked if his blood was okay for Bolu. The doctor hesitated, looking between Kunle and Chiwa. He told Kunle that his blood type didn't match Bolu's. Confused, Kunle asked what the doctor meant. He insisted there must be a mistake because he was Bolu's father. The doctor sighed, choosing his words carefully, and explained that based on Bolu's blood type, it was genetically impossible for Kunle to be his biological father. Kunle felt like he had been punched in the chest. He staggered back, gripping a chair for support. He whispered that it wasn't possible. Chiwa immediately jumped in, insisting the doctor must be mistaken and that Kunle was Bolu's father. There was no way he wasn't. But the doctor's expression didn't change. He said science didn't lie and suggested they conduct further tests to confirm. Kunle didn't say another word. He turned and walked out of the hospital, leaving Chiwa calling after him. His mind was spinning. How could Bolu not be his son? Chiwa was the only woman he had ever been with. He trusted her completely. That night, Kunle couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark living room, replaying the doctor's words over and over. It's genetically impossible. He thought about Bolu, his son, or so he thought. The boy had his smile, his kindness, but now Kunle questioned everything. When Chiwa entered the room, Kunle looked up and quietly asked her to tell him the truth. He asked if Bolu was his son. Chiwa's face twisted in shock, and she asked how he could ask her that. She insisted Bolu was his son. Kunle stared at her, searching her eyes for the truth, and said the doctor claimed it was impossible. He told her he needed her to be honest and asked if she had ever been unfaithful. Chiwa's voice rose, saying she couldn't believe he was accusing her of such a thing. She stormed out of the room, leaving Kunle with more questions than answers. Kunle couldn't let it go. The next day, he called Taiwo, his best friend, and explained everything. He told Taiwo about the hospital visit, the blood test, and the doctor's shocking revelation. Kunle cried as he said he didn't know how to make sense of it all. Taiwo consoled him, saying doctors could make mistakes too. He assured Kunle that Chiwa was a good woman and couldn't do something like that to him. Taiwo advised him to forget what the doctor said and not let the devil destroy his beautiful home. Kunle nodded, wiping his tears, and thanked Taiwo for his advice. That evening, Kunle confronted Chiwa again. He asked her to explain what the doctor had said. Chiwa gasped in shock and asked how he could believe such nonsense. She insisted Bolu was his son and asked how he could let a stranger's words make him doubt her. Kunle hesitated, saying he trusted her but felt they should do a DNA test to be sure. Chiwa's eyes filled with tears. She asked if Kunle wanted to humiliate her. She said if he loved her, he wouldn't suggest such a thing. But she added that if he insisted and the test proved Bolu was his son, she would walk out of the marriage because she wouldn't stay with a man who doubted her. Kunle was taken aback and felt guilty for doubting her. He apologized, saying the doctor must have been mistaken. Chiwa wiped her tears and made him promise not to take it any further. Kunle nodded and promised. But the promise weighed heavily on him. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget the doctor's words. He kept replaying the conversation in his mind, questioning everything. A few nights later, Kunle made a decision. He waited until everyone was asleep. Moving quietly, he tiptoed into the children's rooms. He carefully snipped a small lock of hair from Bolu, Dara, Timmy, and Simi, making sure not to wake them. The next morning, Kunle drove to the hospital with the hair samples. He told the doctor he needed a DNA test for all 4 of his children. The doctor nodded, understanding the urgency in Kunle's voice, and promised the results would be ready in 2 weeks. Kunle left the hospital feeling a mix of dread and determination. He loved his children, but he needed to know the truth. Kunle barely slept for the next 2 weeks. Every moment was consumed by questions he couldn't escape. What if the doctor was right? What if Bolu wasn't his son? Worse still, what if there were more secrets? These thoughts plagued him, and no matter how hard he tried to focus on work or his children, the uncertainty gnawed at him. Chiwa seemed to notice his unease, though she made no mention of it. Instead, she continued her routine, acting as though their argument never happened. She even made more of an effort to be affectionate toward Kunle, but he saw through it. Her sudden kindness only deepened his suspicions. When the call from the hospital finally came, Kunle's hands shook as he picked up the phone. The doctor's voice was calm, but the words were devastating. "Mr. Kunle, I have the DNA results. Bolu, Dara, and Simi are not your biological children. Only Timmy, your second child, is yours." Kunle's world crumbled in that moment. He dropped the phone, his breath coming in short gasps. The betrayal was worse than he could have imagined. 3 out of his 4 children weren't his. He had loved them, cared for them, and sacrificed for them. Now, it felt like his entire life had been a lie. Kunle didn't return home immediately. Instead, he drove aimlessly around Lagos, trying to make sense of it all. By the time he arrived home, it was late at night. Chiwa was waiting for him in the living room, her arms crossed. "Kunle, where have you been?" she asked, her tone sharp. Kunle ignored her question and sat down, staring at her. "I ran a DNA test," he said quietly. Chiwa froze. "What did you just say?" "I said I ran a DNA test on all the children," Kunle repeated, his voice trembling with anger. "And do you know what I found out, Chiwa? Bolu isn't my son. Neither is Dara. Neither is Simi. Only Timmy is mine." "Care to explain?" Chiwa's face paled. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, she let out a shaky laugh. "Kunle, you're being ridiculous. You promised me you wouldn't do this. How could you betray me like this?" "How could I betray you?" Kunle's voice rose. "You've been lying to me for years, Chiwa. Years. I trusted you, I loved you, and this is how you repay me." Tears filled Chiwa's eyes, but Kunle wasn't moved. "Tell me the truth, Chiwa. Who is the father of these children? Is it just one man, or are there others?" Chiwa sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "Kunle, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for what to happen?" Kunle demanded. "It wasn't just one man," Chiwa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bolu and Dara, they're Taiwo's. Simi, he's someone else's." Kunle felt like he had been struck by lightning. Taiwo, his best friend, the same man he had confided in just weeks ago. He stood up, shaking with rage. "Taiwo, my best friend. How long has this been going on, Chiwa?" Chiwa cried harder. It started before we got married. I didn't know how to stop it. And after we got married, I was weak. Taiwo was there for me when you were busy with work. I didn't think you'd ever find out. You didn't think I'd find out. Kunle shouted. You've humiliated me, Tiwa. You've destroyed this family. Do you have any idea what you've done? Kunle also confronted Taiwo. He met him at their usual spot, the small restaurant where they had shared countless meals. Taiwo greeted him with his usual grin, but it disappeared when Kunle threw him a punch and before he could regain his balance. He punched him again and then slammed the DNA results on the table. You're a snake, Kunle said coldly. How could you do this to me? I trusted you. I treated you like a brother, and this is how you repay me. Taiwo stammered, trying to explain, but Kunle didn't want to hear it. He stood up and walked out, leaving Taiwo to stew in his guilt. Kunle didn't sleep that night. He packed his bags and moved into a hotel, leaving Tiwa to explain his sudden absence to the children. Over the next few days, he filed for divorce and requested full custody of Timmy, his biological son. Tiwa tried everything to win him back. She begged, cried, and even sent family members to plead on her behalf, but Kunle was done. He couldn't forgive her betrayal, not after everything he had sacrificed for her and their so-called family. Kunle moved into a new apartment with Timmy, determined to rebuild his life. It wasn't easy. He missed Bolu, Dara, and even Simi, but he knew he couldn't stay in a home built on lies. He promised himself that he would give Timmy the best life possible, free from deceit and betrayal. As the months passed, Kunle found peace in his new life. He focused on his business and his son, and slowly, the pain of Tiwa's betrayal began to fade. He knew he would never trust so easily again, but he also knew he would never settle for less than he deserved.